Welcome everyone. This is Danny and Karl with GetWisdom, and today we're going to continue with our channeling series. And today Karl is going to channel Jane Roberts, who is a channeler and someone who really set the stage for modern channelers in so many ways. And we have 7 questions for her today. She actually passed away 35 years ago, almost to the day. And so we're kind of celebrating an anniversary of a long tradition that's been under kind of a dark cloud for many years for good reason. And so we should have some interesting responses for her now that she's a light being. And so this is we're going to be kind of treading over old ground in a lot of ways, but I think this is important because, as I said earlier, she really did set the stage for the modern channeler. And if you watch videos of her or listen to audio recordings of her, you can see a lot of what's popular now in the channeling world is kind of followed on based on what she presented to the world in those days back in the late 70s and early 80s. So Karl, I know you're gonna have a lot of insightful things to share with us about all of this because this is a great area of study for you. You've obviously done your homework here and present a new outlook on things for all of us.
Well, for better or for worse, I'm it. I've been tagged
Yeah.
by the divine to bring forth some difficult truths about sources of higher wisdom, how they come to be, and who brings it forth, and why, and how, and the various ways that the darkness opposes all of this and corrupts it. And it's most unfortunate. People grow up with a kind of an awareness that there are evil beings. At least they've heard it. They've heard the stories, or they see it in the media and the news and the cinema. And it's certainly part of religion to showcase that as the chief order of battle of the followers of God to take on the minions of the darkness, to oppose them, to push back, to call them out, and most important, to devote oneself to the divine and living on a divine path. So that's kind of been the framework for all of this. And people in today's world have come to a whole bunch of conclusions about all that. And a lot of it is ill-informed. And there's so much disinformation now that it's hard for people to find their way any longer, because not everyone warms up to the idea of getting handed a 2,000-year-old textbook to guide one's life.
Yep.
The more the years roll by, the more we have kind of modern trappings and so many attractive things and enticements that suggest we can do more ourselves with our technology than we ever got out of this old dusty Bible. And what's with that?
Yeah. Hey,
So
Karl,
this is
I want to interrupt here because I kind of realized that maybe we haven't set the stage so well. There's an introduction that people will have read prior to us starting our discussion here. But this is Jane Roberts, who's channeled a being identifying himself as Seth. Okay, Seth.
right.
She came into this somewhat reluctantly, and apparently this being obtained her permission to go ahead and channel through her. She was interested in writing and the paranormal. That was her interest in stuff. I think
Right.
initially she never thought that, I can channel, ascended masters or beings or whatever. Apparently, this being did identify himself as a being who had incarnated as a human at some point, but now had moved on to greater things. And so so there was a huge amount of material that her husband helped her with. His last name was Butts. I can't remember his first name, but they actually deposited this material with Yale University, and and the books that came from this are presented in 10 volumes, and the actual material that Yale University received from her and her husband occupies 164 linear feet of material on shelves in 498 boxes of material. So, there's huge volumes of channeled material from this fellow Seth, and if you go back and you look at that, I haven't read the books. I've done a little bit of research, obviously, in preparation to create these questions that we're going to ask her. And I need to just give a head nod to the fact that I think you and I'll speak for myself, but I do think that you and I are kind of coming from the perspective that we're going to find out that she really wasn't talking with a being who had identified himself completely accurately. And it was probably not a divine source, and probably a lot of the spiritual information that she received from Seth was kind of, milk, not the meat. It was the easy stuff, kind of like manifestation type philosophical and spiritual teachings that she was given, by and large. The reason I say that is because, I think both of us are prepared to be surprised. There may be some aspect of this that doesn't seem apparent at the outset. But my impression from this was that her channeling was basically hijacked, probably by an Anunnaki psychic. That's where my vote comes in on this, having listened to some of this material. The first thing that struck me when I watched it is that, oh gosh, this is so many of the people who have come after her doing channeling work are doing essentially the same thing. It sounds the same. It's the same type of information. It's even presented in the same fashion in a lot of cases. So that's just my take on this. I wanted to set the stage because when we started this, we just said Jane Roberts. Well, a lot of people don't know who the heck that is. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And everything helps in terms of being informed and having the context, because this is all about context. The way we go about our channeling is very much fitting within the rules of engagement, where context and really meaning the intention for the session, the intention I'm holding as a channeler, and then secondarily, whoever might be inquiring of me to find out on their behalf something.
Yeah.
I'm the pipeline, but I'm also the organizer of intention here. So I will have a big influence on what comes through or what doesn't come through. And of course, that as well is secondary to Creator, the creator of all that is, who writes herd on everything.
Right.
And has very specific rules for beings in the light. What is allowed, what isn't. But as you have alluded to, Denny, there is a rich history now in the work that I do pointing to that reality. The Anunnaki are a race of extraterrestrial beings who have been here almost entirely through human history, running the world from behind the scenes. They enslaved us at the outset. And then in a little later era, they stepped behind the scenes. And there's a long story behind that. But they did it because they knew they already had co-opted the people in power, and they could let them be their minions,
right,
to orchestrate things. And they don't need much from us because they have such advanced capabilities. But we're their kind of amusement. We're sort of like a living, breathing video game for them. And they manipulate us like pieces on a chessboard to make things happen, to make people do stupid things, to make them do silly things or dangerous things and get in trouble or kill one another. This is a level of depravity even humans have trouble, understanding and appreciating, despite all the evil things people can do and all the wars that have happened and so on. But when things really go over the edge and go way beyond any reason, that's the extraterrestrial hand showing itself. And their ability to corrupt people is behind all of it. They, in turn, are corrupted by the dark spirits who control things. And this is how evil became a powerful force in our corner of the universe. It was through those dark spirits turning away from love and light. So we may get a lecture on that as part of the backdrop here. So I don't
Yeah.
want to say too much, but so we know a lot going in about what might emerge here because we've seen it before.
Yeah.
That more than 90% of channelers are corrupted by having an imposter step forward. So this is very disheartening. And I was remarking to Denny before we kind of got rolling with the recording here that this isn't my favorite duty to burst people's bubbles.
Yeah.
I still have clients from time to time who will sort of drop into a conversation. Well, I've read all the Seth books, as though that's a really
Yeah.
good thing. And they clearly have gained something from it.
Yeah.
And there's reasons why, because they're being given from the channeler the divine wisdom that's being recycled for the purpose of sort of keeping the game going. And the extraterrestrials view this as a harmless thing because they don't see any value in it. So it's kind of a make-work enterprise that won't really advance someone markedly.
Right.
And the reality is that that's probably so. It's nice to have uplifting thoughts and see lofty principles being described in an eloquent way. But the real gist of what we gain in living is actually putting those things into action, not sitting around thinking about them in the abstract. And that's one of the problems with these messages, that they're sort of like a world of their own, sort of like you go up in the clouds for a while and there's rainbows and sunlight.
Yeah.
But then eventually you got to come back down to earth.
Right.
So
take out the garbage and pay your bills and yeah.
That's right.
And then, yeah, and then the other thing that I said, okay, so there's this group of people out there in the world. I mean, her books have been translated, I think, into 11 or more languages. So it's not like it's just some little isolated enclave of people in the northeast of the United States. This is something that's gone off worldwide, and we've got 35 years of history. And if it was, if it really was earth-shattering material or stuff of great import that advanced humanity, I think it's a logical thing to ask, like, well, where's the evidence of that having, had an effect in the world in terms of, there may be individual lives that were affected in a positive way, but the fact is, and I would stand behind this quite strongly, is that things have not gotten better in the past 35 years. I think there's a very strong argument that things have gotten markedly worse for humanity in the past 35 years. So, if we put a lot of value into the whole idea of channeling, I think that's a valid question to be asking along the way, and for the channelers themselves, has their lives improved by virtue of the fact that they've had this experience, that they've developed this skill. In her case, she died relatively young. She had pretty serious health problems, and so. These are all things that I think we need to pay attention to when we look at stuff like this, and I don't think there's going to be uniform rules across the board. We've learned that through, what we've learned about healing. It's not just a one-size-fits-all proposition in terms of what happens to people when they have experiences like this, but everything should be taken into consideration. Don't exclude some, salient factor of measurements about the quality of someone's life when looking at a phenomenon like channeling. It's all important. It's all grist for the mill.
Yeah. Well, and this is what is so effective about it, that much of what you will hear from a channeler is likely to be truthful as far as it goes. It won't ever be the whole truth, and it will tend to not be things about how to really solve problems. It will be sort of generalities that are high-minded and have the core of truth about them in terms of the the ethical or moral implications, doing right by others, and sort of the things that we're taught as kids, to be fair and to strive and all these things. But there'll be some limitations on the depth and the reach. And that's what's missing. So if you only go to the first day of school and you get the party and the hoopla about how it's going to be wonderful and you're starting your big journey and good for you, you're growing up now, it's going to be fantastic, and one of these days you'll be grown-ups and everything will be something that you've chosen and you're going to make it happen, and it all sounds great. But there's a lot of elbow grease that has to go on before you graduate.
Yeah.
And graduating from school doesn't really set you up for life.
No.
That again is just the beginning.
Right.
And so there's an analogy here I want to make. People will probably doubly hang me for this, but Creator doesn't like our education system and sees it largely as beside the point, a waste of time, and actually doing more harm than good by constraining people, limiting them, regimenting them, and keeping them in a kind of prison for years and years and years and years and years before they ever actually do much in life itself.
Right.
They go off to a holding pen, and it goes on year after year after year. And so that's kind of what you get from the channelings, for the most part.
Right.
It's kind of a holding action to keep people busy thinking they're doing something useful.
Yeah.
So that's my bias about the whole enterprise, because of all that I've seen and all that I've learned. And it's what the divine realm tells me over and over and over. And I started out when I first began channeling thinking, okay, well, one of the first orders of business would be to find out who else is doing, really high level work and who can be trusted and all that. And check up and see. And again and again and again and again, I would ask about someone by name, and I'd be told, well, unfortunately, that channeler is corrupted. They're receiving information from an imposter that is kind of reworked spiritual principles and ideas and said in different ways and new ways, but will have limitation. And in addition, will drag the person into that energy of that corrupting force. That's another element, so we may hear about that as well. So
yeah. So I mean, it's no big stretch for someone like me to come along, having been exposed to this material and thinking that she's been hijacked by an Anunnaki psychic. So that's no big stretch, based on what we've learned here.
Well, and I would encourage people at this point, if you're annoyed at this and insulted and think we must be nuts, give it a listen, give it a hearing. Let's see what she has to say.
Yeah.
And maybe we're not right about her.
Right.
But the issue is a real one, I can promise you.
Yeah.
And you can see that in the fact that there's so many differing voices. And most of the time, it's all within a kind of a certain perspective, though.
Yep.
All sweetness and light all day long.
Yeah.
And dragging you back to that as if that's the answer. Well, think positively, not negatively. Okay, fine. So far, so good. But then what?
Yeah.
Point your canoe downstream, not upstream.
Yeah, and I would also invite people to look at her work and then look at the other channelers that have come along. The impression I got was like, she was kind of like the, assuming it's a corrupted, source, kind of the testing ground to see what would work and what would fly, what could create a following and what may not create a following. I think they were tremendously successful in her case with the inflection, the change of personality as she went from her normal waking self and her manner of speech to the kind of deliverance that she gave during the channeling, you see a lot of that same thing in other channelers that have come along, and like you say, like the perspective that's given, that has been duplicated in many subsequent channeling work, and so it's like, yeah, it works. Why wouldn't they keep doing it that way? No reason not to. It had wings. It had legs. It traveled far. 11 languages. I don't think too many current day channelers could boast what's been accomplished with that initial outing in 35 years ago. That much, 10 volumes of books translated into 11 languages. It went far and wide, evidently. So a lot of people know about Jane Roberts and the Seth Material. I mean, for a lot of people, that was their introduction to the channeling phenomena. So we have 7 questions for her today as a light being. And so maybe we should go ahead and get started.
Yeah. And I just want to add one thing, that I hold all such people in very high regard, because they are doing what they do because they are in spiritual alignment themselves. But that doesn't mean they can't make mistakes at times.
Right.
None of us is perfect.
Or that it's not a safe thing. It's not a safe thing to do.
Right.
It's not safe. I mean, from either perspective, from the audience, the human side, and from the spirit side, it's not a particularly safe place to put yourself.
Well, you need special precautions. That's the key. So what I do as a channeler is I go to Creator of all it is. I go to God. I ask to be connected to my target by the divine, and for the work to be protected from outside listening and interference. And I mean it. And I'm totally believing that this process will work as intended. All of that is essential, by the way.
Yeah.
You can't doubt. You can't go at it in a faint-hearted way, because the divine can't participate then. You're in the lead, everything you do in your life. And any divine help must be requested, and must be requested by a person who believes in the divine. And to the extent you're doubtful, you will get a meager divine response. It's the rules.
Yeah.
And that's why things are in such a mess. God could fix it instantly, but won't do that because it's been put on our shoulders to run the world and to see to the world and its needs. And now we're really behind the 8 ball because we've been infiltrated by dark spirits, and we've got these extraterrestrials living here with us, wanting ill to happen. So I will go ahead and start and invoke the deity to assist in the work, and call upon Jane Roberts in the light, as a light being now, to come and hold forth on our questions and hopefully be of service to all of us to help understand this history and where things can head now, and give us a perspective on the issue of channeling, because that's largely the focus of the questions here. So I'll take a moment to go in the state of consciousness I need, and then she will let us know when she's here.
Okay.
This is Jane Roberts.
Thank you for joining us. A spirit rescue was done for you on 12th July this year. Was this needed? And was your longtime channeling subject, Seth, involved in any way with your transition? Did Seth help you in any way with your own health conditions?
Unfortunately, and this will be a surprise to many who follow my work and believe in me as a spiritual touchstone, advisor, guide, and bringer of truth, I myself was caught up by the darkness in my transition and held back from returning to the light personally. The Seth persona was truly that and was no assistance to me whatsoever. And in fact, the source of Seth and Seth's message was instrumental in seeing that I was targeted and so heavily constrained by a vicious attack of dark spirits pummeling me, haranguing me, harassing, taunting, mocking, jeering, threatening, and making good on their threats through what was perceived by me as a physical assault that I was unable to see or cooperate with the light callers. Doing so requires having a certain vibration to make it possible to cooperate with the outreach that always comes and always is given. This is something that everyone is entitled to have as a birthright, but all too often goes astray because people lack preparation. Some, in addition, and particularly those who have opposed the darkness directly and opposed the extraterrestrial efforts at controlling society, and who represent a danger by virtue of their abilities, will be given a double dose of difficulty. And that is purposeful. It is intended to trap them in a kind of prison, to keep them in limbo in the lower astral plane, where they can languish for years, decades, and even centuries, unless a considerable healing effort is mounted to rescue them from this plight. People are in severe states of limitation when they transition because they have lost all their normal senses and have not yet regained their light being capabilities. It is a period of vulnerability for them. That is why the light callers are sent to be guides and encouragers, to help energetically to reach out, raise the person up enough, and engage with them so they will cooperate further. And that is all that's needed from the end of the newly transitioning human spirit. And with the elevation that follows, will step by step regain their higher awareness and faculties, and will have a time of acclimation needed in most cases to fully regain their full normal functioning in the higher realm. And that is because of the difficulty from the sojourn among physical humans. I was lucky that you came out of loving concern for me, and also with curiosity about my life and my doings, that you reached out to me with the loving treatment through this beautiful protocol constructed to help such dark times the earthbound spirits experience, and all those who struggle worldwide with the oppression by the cabal, to hold humanity back, to encourage rather than solve problems, to increase difficulty, confusion, and the political gridlock that prevents economic and governmental solutions from truly working as they could. In a similar way, during my sojourn in the physical, as the channeler self many knew me by, I was receiving no help from the Seth persona with my health issues. There were promises made, there were allusions to healing possibilities and encouragement that things would be solved along the way. I was given a kind of hand-holding only, but no material effort. To the extent I was still in divine alignment, I did get some support from the divine realm. But because I was not invoking it directly by name, there was only a minimal amount of support that could be given to me. This will condemn anyone, no matter how lofty they believe they are and how true to high purpose and in alignment with the light they believe they are in their thoughts, words, and deeds. If they do not reach out purposefully by name to a divine being, this will be an exercise of ego alone, believing they have come from the light and are imbued with divine attributes, allowing them to not only act divinely, but to do divine work on behalf of others in addition to the self. While this is true, it is true to only a limited extent. It is a false promise. That is what was given to me. There needs to be purposeful interaction with the divine realm for them to interact purposefully with you and your energy, and most importantly, the past history of where you have been, all you have done, and all that has happened to you, making up the karmic destiny that it will launch forward. This is the missing piece of the puzzle for human difficulty and has to be addressed before anything truly meaningful will happen of a deep and long-lasting benefit.
Okay, thank you. Was Seth's identity that was given to you accurate during your time channeling this being? What do you now know about Seth?